The shelves were full. That is the first thing you have to understand. The shelves were full, the parking lots were crowded every December, and the jingle, that absurd, cheerful jingle, had been lodged in the heads of 3 consecutive generations of American children. In the mid-2000s, Toys R Us operated more than 1,500 stores across 35 countries. Revenue exceeded $11 billion. The company employed nearly 70,000 people. By any conventional measure, it was not merely surviving. It was defining an entire category of retail. Then the stores went dark, every last one of them. Not in a single dramatic collapse, not overnight, but with the slow, terrible certainty of a structure whose foundation had been compromised years before anyone thought to check it. By 2018, the shelves were empty, the parking lots were quiet, and the Jeffrey the Giraffe balloon, which had floated above Thanksgiving parades for decades, would not be appearing again. This is the story of how that happened, and it is not the story most people think it is. Charles Lazarus did not set out to build the largest toy retailer in the world. He set out to sell cribs. In 1948, fresh from military service, Lazarus opened a children's furniture store in Washington, D.C., a modest shop responding to a straightforward observation. Returning soldiers were starting families, families needed furniture, and furniture stores weren't serving them well. What he discovered quickly was that the parents buying cribs also needed somewhere to buy toys. He pivoted. By 1957, the furniture was gone and the toys had taken over. The concept was disarmingly simple, a superstore devoted entirely to children's products, stocked deeper and priced lower than any department store could match. The world rewarded this idea with something close to devotion. Toys R Us stores became destinations, not just retailers. Children lobbied parents for trips the way they lobbied for vacations. The stores were enormous, warehouse scale, deliberately overwhelming, and that scale was the point. Walking into a Toys R Us in 1985 was an experience that department store toy sections could not replicate. The breadth of inventory was the product. You went there not because you knew what you wanted, but because you weren't sure, and being unsure in a Toys R Us was its own kind of joy. By the late 1990s, the company had survived the rise of mass discounters like Walmart and the early insurgency of specialty retailers. Its stock had seen turbulent periods, but the core premise, category dominance through sheer scale, seemed durable. The brand was among the most recognized in American retail. Jeffrey the Giraffe had an approval rating that most politicians would envy. Inside the company, there was pride, and with the pride came a particular kind of confidence, the belief that the things that made Toys R Us powerful were permanent features of the landscape. That belief would cost them everything. In the year 2000, Toys R Us.com was losing the early battle for online toy sales. The 1999 holiday season had been operationally disastrous. The company failed to fulfill thousands of online orders on time, drawing regulatory scrutiny and customer fury. Leadership faced a choice: build the technical infrastructure required to compete in e-commerce or find a partner who already had it. They found Amazon. The deal, struck in 2000, seemed elegant in its logic. Toys R Us would become the exclusive toy seller on Amazon's platform. Amazon would handle the logistics, the fulfillment infrastructure, the technological complexity that Toys R Us had proven it couldn't manage alone. In exchange, Toys R Us would pay fees and surrender a portion of control over its own online sales channel. In the conference rooms where this was negotiated, the arrangement appeared to solve a genuine problem. The executives who approved it were not reckless people. They were experienced retail operators responding rationally to demonstrated failure. They chose the partner best positioned to help them. What they did not fully anticipate, what the contract apparently failed to prevent, was Amazon's subsequent decision to allow other toy vendors onto the same platform. Third-party sellers began appearing alongside Toys R Us listings. The exclusivity that Toys R Us believed it had purchased turned out to be something narrower, or something Amazon interpreted differently. What followed was litigation. Toys R Us sued Amazon in 2004, and by 2006, a New Jersey court had ruled that Amazon had violated the exclusivity agreement, freeing Toys R Us to pursue other e-commerce arrangements. But the damage had a different character than a breach of contract. In the years of the Amazon partnership, Toys R Us had allowed its own digital infrastructure to atrophy. There was no parallel investment, no hedged strategy, no plan B being quietly developed in a back office. The company had outsourced not just its logistics, but its digital future, and the years it spent relying on Amazon were years it did not spend building the capability to compete without it. By the time the legal relationship ended, Amazon had learned the toy business thoroughly. Toys R Us had learned very little about e-commerce. Then came the leveraged buyout. In 2005, a consortium of private equity firms, KKR, Bain Capital, and Vornado Realty Trust, acquired Toys R Us for approximately $6.6 billion. The transaction was structured, as leveraged buyouts typically are, by loading the acquired company with the debt used to purchase it. Almost immediately, Toys R Us was carrying roughly $5 billion in long-term debt obligations. The annual interest payments on that debt would ultimately run to approximately $400 million per year. To understand what that figure means operationally, consider what $400 million annually could have funded. It could have financed a serious e-commerce build-out. It could have funded store renovations. The company's locations, many of which dated to the 1980s, were visibly aging relative to competitors. It could have funded the kind of customer experience investment that might have differentiated the stores from the price competition they faced from Walmart and later Amazon. Instead, that money left the company every year in interest payments, before a single toy was ordered, before a single employee received a paycheck, before a single strategic decision could be made. The leveraged buyout did not cause Toys R Us to fail, but it created the conditions under which failure became almost structurally inevitable. A company trying to fight a war for its survival while carrying a weight its competitors did not have to carry. The years between 2005 and 2017 were not, from the outside, a story of obvious deterioration. Toys R Us remained one of the largest toy retailers in the world. Revenue stayed above $10 billion for much of this period. The stores remained open. The brand remained recognizable. But inside the company, the arithmetic was unforgiving. Walmart and Target were selling toys at prices Toys R Us couldn't match without accepting margins that the debt service made unsustainable. Amazon was growing its toy category aggressively, offering selection that rivaled Toys R Us and convenience that no physical retailer could replicate. Every year, a slightly larger share of toy purchases migrated online. Every year, the interest payments consumed capital that might otherwise have funded a response. The company did invest in e-commerce, eventually, but the investment was incremental and late, an attempt to retrofit digital capability onto an organization whose cost structure and debt load left little room for the kind of bold reinvention the moment required. There were internal voices that understood the severity of the situation. There were strategic plans. There were consultants. In 2017, the company was reportedly working toward a restructuring that might have addressed the debt load while preserving the operating business. What intervened was a news report. In September of that year, Reuters reported that Toys R Us was preparing to file for bankruptcy. The story landed before the company had completed its preparations. Suppliers, reading the report, began tightening credit terms. The loss of supplier confidence accelerated a liquidity crisis the company had been managing carefully. What might have been an orderly restructuring began to tip toward something less controlled. Toys R Us filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy protection in September 2017. At the time, the filing was described as a step toward reorganization, a chance to shed the debt and emerge leaner. Many companies have done exactly that, but the holiday season that followed was difficult. Consumer confidence in the brand was shaken, and some customers began shopping elsewhere, unwilling to risk that gift cards or returns might be complicated by the bankruptcy process. Creditors and potential acquirers circled. The reorganization that was supposed to rescue the company did not materialize on terms the business could survive. In March 2018, Toys R Us announced it would liquidate its United States operations entirely. The 735 remaining American stores would close. More than 30,000 employees would lose their jobs. The liquidation sales that followed were, for many people of a certain age, a quietly devastating thing to witness. The toys marked down, the shelves emptying, the fixtures themselves eventually for sale, the Jeffrey banners coming down one by one. The United Kingdom operations, which had been conducting their own insolvency process, closed their 105 stores that same spring. Tens of thousands more employees were affected globally. In many communities, the Toys R Us closure left large commercial real estate vacancies that proved difficult to fill. The stores were designed at a scale and for a purpose that few other retailers could easily repurpose. The story of Toys R Us is often told as a story about failing to adapt to the internet. That framing is not wrong, exactly, but it is incomplete in a way that matters. The executives who ran Toys R Us were not oblivious to the internet. They saw it. They tried to respond to it. They made a partnership with the company that, at the time, seemed to offer the fastest path to digital relevance. The error was not ignorance of change. The error was a structural one. A company that outsourced the capability it most needed to develop, at the precise moment it most needed to develop it, and then took on financial obligations that removed its ability to recover when the outsourcing proved catastrophically misaligned. What Toys R Us reveals is a more specific trap than failure to innovate. It is the trap of solving a problem in a way that transfers the problem to someone else, and in doing so, transferring the capability that would have let you solve the next problem yourself. The Amazon partnership didn't just fail to build Toys R Us's digital capability. It actively prevented the company from building that capability because the partnership removed the urgency and provided the illusion of adequacy. Why invest in your own e-commerce infrastructure when your products are already on the most visited e-commerce platform in the country? This trap is not unique to retail. It operates wherever organizations outsource a function they have identified as strategically critical, accepting short-term relief in exchange for long-term dependency. The outsourcing feels rational, the partner is better at the function, the cost is lower, the pressure is relieved. But the capability gap widens every year, until the day the partnership ends or changes, and the organization discovers that it has no way to perform the function it can no longer live without. Layered on top of this, financial structures that appear manageable under favorable conditions can become existential under stress. Debt that is serviced easily during profitable years becomes a stranglehold when margins compress and capital is urgently needed elsewhere. People who made these decisions were intelligent and experienced. They were operating under real constraints, responding to genuine pressures, choosing from options that each carried risks. That is precisely the point. The failure of Toys R Us was not a failure of stupidity or complacency. It was a failure of a particular kind of organizational reasoning, one that trades long-term structural capacity for short-term problem resolution, and then becomes unable to distinguish between the two. The Toys R Us name still exists. The brand was acquired out of bankruptcy, and in various forms, shop-in-shop arrangements, licensing deals, attempted revivals, it has continued to surface. As of this writing, there are Toys R Us sections in some Macy's stores. There is a website. The giraffe endures in a diminished form as intellectual property rather than as an experience. What does not exist is the thing that mattered. The stores, the scale, the floors full of possibility, the specific joy of being a child in a place built entirely for children. That is gone, and it will not return because the conditions that made it possible, the economic logic, the competitive landscape, the consumer behavior have all moved on. Charles Lazarus, who founded the company in a Washington furniture shop in 1948, died in March 2018, 1 week after the liquidation of the American stores was announced. He was 94. He had watched his creation grow into something genuinely remarkable and lived just long enough to watch it disappear. What he built was not defeated by a better toy store. It was defeated in the end by the weight of its own decisions, the ones that seemed reasonable at the time, the ones that foreclosed the options that might have saved it. That is, perhaps, the most honest thing that can be said about how large organizations fail, not with a villain, not with a moment of obvious folly, but with a series of choices that each made sense in isolation. and which combined, over time, into something from which there was no way back.